Podcasting worldwide from Vancouver, Canada. Welcome back to the Personal Process Podcast. The show that takes you through the growth, hardship, self-discovery, lessons, and stories of individuals who achieved success in their own personal path. Trust the process.
Welcome back to the Personal Process Podcast. Today, we are very excited to have Jeff Wald, the author of The End of Jobs. Dun, dun, dun. Rise of on-demand workers and Agile corporations. Jeff Wald has done some amazing things in his lifetime. And just to go through a few, he has been an advisor for entrepreneurships. He is an angel investor. He is on the board as a director for multiple public and private firms. And he is going to talk about his journey in entrepreneurship, how it formed where he is now. And I'm just very excited to have you on, Jeff. Is there anything that I missed that you'd like to include for our guests to know?
Well, I mean, you hit the book, and we were super lucky that we hit #1 in all of Amazon's HR categories, which was great. But I have started 4 companies, and the most recent is a company called WorkMarket, which is enterprise software. We raised about $70 million from Union Square Ventures, SoftBank, and a few others, and we sold the company in 2018 to ADP. And so for 2.5 years, I had the pleasure of being on the senior leadership team of ADP, and I have departed now that my lockup has ended, and now I'm thinking about startup number 5.
Startup number 5. And can you give us the secrets or no?
I don't know what it is yet. I am literally, I've got whiteboards after whiteboards of just scribbles right now.
I love it.
Scribbles will turn into something more substantive at some point.
I love that. And Jeff, before we get into this whole startup realm, I also just wanted to quickly mention that you actually have a lot of degrees. You have an MBA from Harvard, you have an MS and BS from Cornell. And I'm just wondering, do you think that the education that you had, and this is going to be a very specific question, played a role to where you are now?
100%.
100%? In what way?
In innumerable ways. I mean, look, the foundations that one gets is super important. Look, did I learn things at Cornell University that helped me in my first job at JP Morgan? No, not really. I mean, no. But the work ethic, the networks, the brand of those universities, the kind of lift you get in your career from getting to attend them, and this goes into substantive questions about systemic injustice. Like, look, I had tutors 6 ways from Sunday that helped me study for the SAT. I had people helping me prepare my applications. I wrote everything, just to be clear, and nobody paid anybody anything to get me into the universities the way some stuff just happened. But I had so many advantages into getting into that university that somebody that was equally, quote unquote, talented from an intellect standpoint just didn't have, and therefore they didn't get in. And the lift you get from the brand of the university, the lift you get from the network that you get to develop there, immeasurable. And then Harvard's different in the business school experience in as much as, that really is about what you did professionally. And but again, did I hire a GMAT tutor? Of course I did. Completely. Did I have a lot of people look through my essays, give me thoughts and things like that? Of course I did. But it's the same thing, man. That lift from the brand of Harvard University, of Harvard Business School, the network that you build up, it's invaluable. It is priceless. And so the help that I got and the good fortune that I have, that I had to attend those universities, were immeasurably impactful in the first steps of my journeys.
Great point. And I completely agree. I think university, a lot of people, at least I think in our parents' generation, they say, go to university, you'll learn a lot of good stuff and all that. And I think that was true for their time. But I think in the modern day, especially with the work that you're doing, the lessons that we may be learning are, in my opinion, a little bit outdated, and they're not keeping up with the times that are changing rapidly. But I think exactly like you mentioned, the networking ability, the experience we have to meet other individuals, meet ourselves, and realize, I guess, what life is for us is invaluable. And speaking on experience, Jeff, I wanted to ask you about your experience starting your first startup. How old were you? What were you thinking? And what was going through your mind at the time?
So I was 31, somewhere around there, and I had the good fortune of being at JP Morgan and having JP Morgan pay for business school for me, which they'd actually never done before. They'd send people part-time.
Wow.
They never sent anybody full-time. And I worked really hard at JP and developed a reputation and got to know the right people. And so they paid for school. And after being back there for a few months, hated it, and left, went to a venture firm and got so enamored with entrepreneurship. There is something so incredible about the people that decide to go and take that risk. And when you look at the kinds of things that do make up American exceptionalism, which is something I appreciate we're having a conversation with you in Vancouver, but there are a number of things that do make America an exceptional country. And the entrepreneurial environment, a culture that supports those that go and take risks and fail, a capital market that is buoyant and will back people to go and take those risks. And the upside one can get if you're successful, the people that go and take those risks, they're a huge part of what makes America great. And so I've always been so enamored with entrepreneurs. And during my time as a venture capitalist, I became all the more enamored to the point where I thought, I want to go do this. And so I left the venture firm and I started the first company, and I made the mistake of funding it myself.
Mistake.
Oh yes, big mistake.
Big
mistake. If you can use other people's money, you should use other people's money. The whole notion of, you want to have more of it. Yeah, don't worry about that. It's okay. You can, smaller slice, bigger pie. You're never hurt by making people money. And I've been fortunate enough to make people money in everything that I've done, or give them their money back, which is actually what happened with this first company. It was a content sharing platform. And I ended up digging into my pocket and paying back the investors because the two co-founders I had sued each other and the whole company fell apart. This was, we were a year and a half in, somewhere around there. And I just look, you didn't take that risk. If we had built the tech and it didn't work, well, that's a risk you take and you lose your money. If someone had beaten us to market, that's a risk you take. If the tech worked, but the customers didn't care and didn't want it, that's a risk you take. But these two idiots suing each other was not a risk that people should have taken, so I paid them back. One of them is actually one of the more wealthy families in the world, and there's a great irony with me digging into my pocket paying them back, because those are my last dollars. I literally wired them the last money in my bank account, and I was broke.
What were you feeling at the time?
I got to tell you, man, I was so depressed. There was something about the Jeff Wald that went into that experience that was so arrogant, that was so insecure, and thus, the arrogance is usually a manifestation of that. And it was so filled with what a lot of people now call a fixed mindset, right? Everything that happens is either proof or disproof of this fixed point of view. And that fixed point of view was I was awesome, and I was super smart, and I was going to accomplish all these great things. And by the way, that fixed mindset got reinforced by killing it at JP Morgan, by going to these great universities, by doing very well as a venture capitalist. And so when I failed, I was not prepared for that. And the facade of, I'm so amazing came crumbling down, and it hit me. I didn't get out of bed for a week, didn't leave the apartment for a month. It was tough. And because you're in that spot, and because you have this fixed mindset, and the proof point was that you're terrible, you don't ask for help. Wow. And there were a lot of people whose hands were reaching down, being like, "Hey, man, you okay?" And I'm like, "I'm fine. I want to talk. I'm fine." And it's tough. It is tough in those moments, as all entrepreneurs know, those moments where you get knocked down. It is tough to try to pick yourself up. And it's certainly tough to ask for help. And I didn't ask for help, and I could have, and I should have. I shouldn't have been as well. There were 1,000 things I shouldn't have been, but not asking for help, I think, was the biggest mistake in that.
Right. And I guess what was the pivotal moment that changed that point of, just being down and hurt from all this?
My older brother. My
Hmm.
older brother kind of came in and he's just like, "What is wrong with you? Get it together, man." Not in that tough love kind of way. He actually said it in a very different way, but that was kind of the message. And I remember his exact questions were, "What if you would?" Because we were very close to selling the company, not for a big amount of money, but just to sell it for $1, just so
Sure.
somebody else would have taken it and run with it, and that way I would have at least had the narrative that it was sold.
Yeah.
And he's like, "What difference would it make in your life?" Because it wasn't going to be any money; it was going to be $1 if it got sold. I was like, I don't remember what I said, and whatever it was I said, he said, "You are that. You are the company sold. Just be it."
Wow.
And there was something about that I just was like, okay, I will just be it. And there's a lot of great sayings about there, whether it's be the change you want to see in the world, obviously from Gandhi. The way I think about that saying and the various derivatives thereof is that, and this is actually very deep in Jewish theology, something I'm learning from my good friend Mark Gerson as he does these Torah studies that I attend not really that often, but from time to time. I'm not a very religious person, but there's something about just be that thing. And if you just be it, and this is steeped in cognitive behavioral therapy, just be it. Just be it over and over again. And cognitive research would tell us that over a 90-day period, that habit becomes ingrained. That becomes actually who you are, which goes to one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite movies, which is from Batman Begins, the first
Nice.
Christian Bale Batman, where Rachel Dawes says to him, it's not who you are, it's what you do that defines you. And it's what you do that defines you. So just do those things.
Wow.
Yeah, that was a meandering answer there.
No, I like it.
Went to my brother and went to depression. We went to one of the great movies of Western civilization. What more do you need?
I mean, we should end the interview right now, eh?
Spike it.
Exactly. But no, Jeff, these are very important conversation. I appreciate you sharing such an intimate part of your life with us because, we live in the Instagram generation where everyone just posts their snapshots of, hey, I'm going to, I don't know, New York City, going to post on the Brooklyn Bridge. And, I've just bought $1 million company like this. I just founded it, sold it to, I don't know, Facebook. But, there's a lot of steps in between that a lot of individuals don't see. And I think having these sort of conversations really help us understand the reality of life. And especially with entrepreneurship being a field where success is continuously preached and you have to put on a game face on every single meeting you go to. I'm just wondering how this experience shaped the future aspects of Jeff Wald. What role did this have?
Well, I think the first and most important one was that it was okay to ask for help. And there's a great saying in startup land, the key to success is getting knocked down 7 times and
getting
yourself up 8. See, you know it. Mm-hmm. And there are multiple reasons I love it, right? One, it's so evocative. You can just see being kicked down in the dust and you stand up and you dust yourself off and you move forward and you move forward. And there's something about the numeric component, right? Because you get knocked down again and again and again. It is pick yourself up, which I appreciate that as entrepreneurs, it gets very lonely. And so part of the reason that I don't love that saying as much as it is my favorite is it's pick yourself up. And there are a lot of people who put their hand down to help you if you ask. But, I accept that it is a lonely road and you got to pick yourself up. But the other reason that I kind of love and / hate it is that it doesn't make any sense. Because if I got knocked down 7 times, I would get up 7 times. Why would I get up 8? Did I start on the ground? Like,
if you're Drake, you start from the bottom.
Mathematically, it doesn't make any sense. So, but I love it. So asking for help was the thing. And I actually wrote this piece the other day, which I haven't published yet, because I was asked what I learned from the NYPD. I spent better part of 10 years as a reserve officer in the NYPD, the auxiliary units in New York City. And I will tell you, if you ask any officer on any police force anywhere in the world, what is the most powerful weapon you have on you? You know, they have different kinds of guns and batons and all kinds of sprays and things like that. And they'll say their radio.
Wow.
The radio is the most powerful weapon any officer has. And that radio is there to ask for help. And if these people, who are some of the bravest humans you will ever meet, who put their lives on the line every single day to keep us safe, if they wouldn't hesitate for a second to ask for help, why would anybody else? And so I didn't ask for help. I could have asked for help while the company was going down. I could have asked for help while I was depressed. Didn't ask it. And it was forced upon me by my family, for which I obviously am forever grateful. But that is the biggest change. That, and certainly any kind of outward display of arrogance certainly gets knocked down when you're flat broke after going through these things. And I remember I had my 5-year business school reunion right around there, and people were like, "Hey, what's up? How you doing?" I'm like, "I'm broke." It's not good. It's not good. I did not enjoy the 5-year reunion. But you also learn through that failure to let go of these ideas of the facade and the always being on, and you got to present these things, and you can learn to be more real, which is something that comes with experience and getting kicked in the teeth, and you take your lumps and you keep going. And so the Jeff Wald that I am now is very, very different than the person who had that company fail. And I'm much happier as this person than I am as that person. And I'm glad I went through the experience, which is not something I ever thought I would say as I sat there wallowing in my apartment.
I was just going to actually mention that. It sounds like you're grateful that that experience occurred. And, I think a lot of individuals go through challenging times, obviously to different magnitudes and different factors. But I think if we have an opportunity to actually sincerely reflect on the situation, and it's a hard enough uppercut to the jaw that it knocks our paradigm completely off the podium, it really gives us an opportunity to see it from a bird's eye view, what we're actually thinking, rather than just going through the, every, step as we're already formulated. We get to step back, pause, think about what we're doing, and actually say, maybe that's not the right way. And it seems like this was a good opportunity for you, but you mentioned that it allowed you to become real. What does that mean for you, and what can individuals take away from
that? Well, when you look at, I'm going to give you a thread here. So
sure.
Let me know if I'm not saying this in a way that tracks. When you look at any study, any data, any information on team dynamics, there is one thing that is foundational that has to happen for any team to be functional, and that's trust. Right? Without trust, the team doesn't function. And if you have the foundation of trust, you can have creative conflict, and you can get to better outcomes, and joint agreement on a path, and then better results. How do you establish trust is often then a question asked in a company environment. And I will say that I think we were very lucky at WorkMarket, the last company, to have great team dynamics and to have a lot of trust. And I think it started with the fact that I was always okay at that point in my career with being vulnerable and saying, I don't know what the answer is. What do you guys think? And for something to happen, and I would say, nope, this is on me. I screwed this up, 100% my fault. And that encourages others to say, nope, my mistake. And having that type of environment made it so much better for our team, for innovation, for creativity, for trust. And so those are the kinds of things that I think helped me become a different person, was being more comfortable in being vulnerable, thus real. Because otherwise, as my coach would always say, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Those two things are sometimes at odds. And I will tell you, because look, I'm human, so let's not pretend that I do all this perfectly. I slip back every now and again whenever I get very upset. My coach has another great saying, your intellect is the rider and your emotions are the elephant. If the emotions decide they want to go left, I don't care what the rider wants to do, the elephant's going left. You can't really stop it. And so there certainly would be times in board meetings where I would get very upset and our board members would be like, like Jeff's in a mood, because I'd be sitting there with like my hoodie over my head, just sitting in the corner with my arms folded, like, screw you guys. These are some of the best VCs in the world that I was saying this to. And I would be annoyed because they just wouldn't understand what I was saying and this and that. And my coach would be like, okay, well, how did that work for you? After I would tell him what happened, how is that working for you? I'm like, well, it really isn't good. And then we would uncover it. Like, I was so annoyed that they weren't understanding that I was right, that I lost the ability to be effective. And so where I am now is I start most meetings off with, what is the goal? What do we want to achieve? I know what I go into a meeting want to achieve now. I never step in anywhere with understanding what I want out of it. But I also want to make sure that the other people are getting what they want. And I will tell you, you will never have anybody say, well, why are you asking me that question? When you ask, hey, what do you want to make sure we accomplish here today? Because I want to know what you want, and I want to know how to meet your goals. And then I'm going to express what my goals are, and let's hope the two overlap, and let's set an agenda, and let's be effective with our time. That's a great way to be. It's a great, great, great way to be. And I could not have gotten there without going through the journey I went through.
Wow. That is, man, I think we just need to make that our sample. That was just beautiful. I'm wondering on this, Jeff, because being real and authentic is something that I really much appreciate myself. And, just saying, hey, I don't know something, or, maybe I was a bit too harsh on you guys last time. But there are individuals who just do not have the ability, or even if you show them that, they may take advantage of that. How can you inspire a group of individuals to develop this vulnerability and authenticity and realness when obviously it's a hit to their own ego? And yeah.
Well, the first thing I would tell them is to read Brene Brown's stuff and watch her videos, because I think she's magic. I will tell you this. There were a number of members of our team that weren't down with it. They just weren't. They were so insecure. They were so had to be proven right. And if there was a challenge to them, they would take it so defensively. And it was funny in as much as I would see myself in them. And there was one guy in particular, who obviously we'll leave names out of it, that everybody was like, all he wants in life is to be you. Like, everybody on the team is just like, he just does everything you do. I'm like, no, he doesn't. He does everything I used to do. And I would always say to him, I was like, you make me so sad, because you are so talented and you are so caught up in your own insecurities that you are not using every opportunity to grow. He's like, oh, of course I want to. I want to. I'm like, you always say you want to, and you never do. And it just bums me out, man, because I know that you could be so much more. And he would say, but I want to learn. And I would, and then something would happen. And I would say, okay, well, are you happy with that outcome? He's like, well, no, because of this, this, and this. I was like, okay, what would you have done differently? Well, I shouldn't have done anything. They should have. I'm like, oh my gosh, dude. No. And so, look, after 3 years, I stopped trying. And I did try for 3 years. And I just was like, dude, I will always be here to help you, but there's only so much I can do. And at some point, it's just a bummer, because you're never going to achieve your potential. He left us after we were acquired.
Right.
And went to a new company, and then he called me a year and a half into the new company, and there was all these things. And I was like, you are going through the exact same patterns. And if you think this story is going to turn any different than the little revolt you had on the team that you led for us, on the same thing that happened to you before you came to us, are you noticing a pattern here? Because at some point, it's not everybody else that's stupid, it's you. Which is one of my favorite things to say to startup founders when they're like, oh, I can't raise money, everyone doesn't get it. I'm like, at some point, it's not everyone else that doesn't get it, it's you that doesn't get it. So maybe shut down the tents and go home.
Yeah. And that's such an important point. You can show someone where their door is and where their lock is to get into their house, but ultimately they have the key. And no matter how much time you point to it, use a laser pointer, make a video of it, if they don't want to go there and put their own key into that door to unlock, go ahead.
Which is great. Yes, I agree with that. But let me augment that with this,
Sure.
which is something that I'd always say: are you happy with it? How is that working for you? And if the answer is actually I'm okay with it, then great.
Agreed.
Then great. Be fine with it. My approach as a manager doesn't really sometimes fit into the way I want to be as a person, but it works. And so this is something else my coach would say. He would just be like, well, it's working. So it's suboptimal in my view. It's suboptimal for a host of ways, but if it's working for you, just go with it. And so if it's working for you, stay with it. And don't go through, even though I've showed you where the lock is, I've showed you where the door is. If you're fine breaking the window each time and replacing the window, go nuts. If that works for you, go nuts. But if you're not, then think about how you change it. And it might require a change to the operating system.
Absolutely. Very good point too. Everyone's goals in life are different. And I think that comes back to your point with the win-win example. When you're in meetings, when you're meeting individuals, you have to see what they want. What you want may be good and may be the most effective thing. And maybe the other person just wants to have a good business partner they chat with. They make a couple $100 on the side and they can have their full-time job, even if there's potential for $1 million a week. Who knows?
100%. Yeah.
So Jeff, I wanted to kind of ask you, so we got this realness aspect of you. We've gone through the challenges the first startup had. We have a new revelation in life of what is the real Jeff. I want to know how this played out in your second startup. Can you guide us through that? How are you feeling? Like, were you motivated, scared?
Well, the second one was, let's just, there were a bunch of other twists and turns in two other companies that I'll kind of leave to the side because they were.
Sure, please.
But the second one, let's just call it work market. I was scared out of my mind. And I will tell you this, as I stand here now, going to do the fifth, I'm scared now. I'm scared that I'll start something and people, won't work and people will be like, oh, the others must have been a fluke. I'm scared of picking a path, kind of this paradox of choice. Like, do I start this company? Do I start that company? Do I take this job or that job? And you know what? I don't want anyone to be like, oh no, I'm so sorry for Jeff. Obviously, nobody gives a damn that I have this problem. Doesn't make it not a problem. Still a problem. But it leaves me with this fear that I'm going to make the wrong choice. And so, those insecurities still bubble up. I won't pretend that all those demons have been slayed. They haven't. So I'm excited about what may come next. I was certainly scared with the founding of Work Market. But I had a great co-founder who was super smart and just very impressive, and he knew the space better than I did, and he made those first few steps in the journey possible, and then I could take over.
Right. And once you did take over, was there anything in particular other than being real that you've noticed that you did that may have, I guess, accelerated the growth of the company to where it was, acquired?
It's funny. I always think about the things that I didn't do. I always talk about the big mistakes I made. I never thought about the things that I did well.
Me and you are so alike. We always think about the mess ups.
We could talk for an hour about the things I screwed up, and I'm like, oh, here are the 5 biggest mistakes I made. I've got that speech down pat. The things that I think I did well was to be authentic. That there is, I hope, obviously don't know this, but I know most of the data points. I don't know them all, but I'll still make this statement. I don't think there's a single person at Work Market that didn't think that I cared about them. And there's a great saying, nobody will care how much you know unless they know how much you care. And people would come into my office, and they still do. By the way, I don't have an office anymore because I'm not there anymore, but they will still call me up, and they know, even when I was running Work Market and it was against my interest, if they came to me and said, hey, this just isn't my jam anymore, we talk about it for a little bit, and if it genuinely wasn't their jam anymore, or if I couldn't fix anything to make it their jam again, I'd be like, great, what kind of company do you want to go to? You want to go early stage? You want to go later? Do you want to go to a startup in this industry, that industry? My Rolodex, wide open to you.
Wow.
And so I would help people leave the company all the time. All the time. And in some of those conversations where people would come in and they would say, hey, I wasn't thinking about leaving, but I got this call, and so I had I had an interview, and they made me an offer, and so I just wanted to talk about it with you. Sometimes I would look through their offer, and I'd be like, come here. I'd give them a hug. I'd be like, congratulations. That's great. You should take that.
Wow.
And sometimes I would say, look, if you want to go, let's find you something different, and this and that. And then sometimes I would say, you're out of your mind. You are 100% wrong. This offer's crap, but you need to stay because of I know what your goals are, and you are best suited to get those things here. If you go someplace else, they will not do these things for you. And you're wrong about this. I will help you, but I'm telling you you're wrong. I would also, again, tell them, no, you're 100% right. You should take this offer and you should go. Like, there's nothing we can do to match that, both from a learning standpoint, a money standpoint, an equity standpoint, whatever. And so I think because I did those things, when there was any kind of crunch time, when investors wanted to know this or that, or things were down, they would all rally together. And we had very low attrition at that company, not because I was helping people leave, but because I was helping people leave. They would just say, look, anytime I want to go, I know Jeff will help me. And that includes conversations I've had with people that left us and then are now looking for their thing after that. I will still help them, right? Like, these were a group of people that helped me to achieve my goals. And so the least I can do is help them achieve theirs.
Wow. So it seems to me, from my understanding, that it kind of pushed you to be 100% genuine and compassion, regardless if it hurts you, your business. I think the general business sense, just looking at, numbers, if someone heard that, like, you're helping people leave, they're like, what are you doing? Training costs. We have to find the good people. I guess, how would you kind of pitch this to more executives, more bosses, more directors?
They're going to leave anyway, right?
Boom.
Like, they're going to go. And so if they're going to go, so here's the way I always thought about it, right? If they're going to go, maybe I could get them into a company that I'm an investor in or something like that, because they're really talented. So they could still be working for my book one way or the other. And I tell them this, by the way. I'm like, no, you should go to companies like these because I'm an investor there and you're awesome. And I still want to benefit from your brilliance and your hard work. So that was always one thing. Two, if you are having those types of conversations with people, they are much more likely to be open to a conversation about, well, how can we help you stay? And you can be proactive, because once they start down that road of doing interviews and getting offers, it is very difficult to retain them. But if they are able to have that dialogue, like, hey, man, I don't think I really like it anymore. I'm struggling. Great. I have a high degree of being able to retain that person if I know at that point in time. If I only find out that they're unhappy when they come in and say, hey, I've got an offer, because everybody there knows the only way you can really piss me off is to just come in and be like, I'm giving you 2 weeks. I'm out. And I'm just like, what? Like, I would annoy me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that very rarely happened. I wouldn't say it never happened, but it very rarely happened. But you can, if you are helping people with their careers in terms of what you can do internally, what kind of resources you can bring externally, sending them to a course, doing an online training, whatever it is, you are tremendously more likely to get them to stay. And if you can have those kind of dialogues when they start to get off path, and you can have the conversation with them, then you again have a very high probability of retaining them. Whereas once they've started down that path, your probability of retaining them massively drops.
Wow. And, also another factor is just that trust that we're talking about, right?
Sure.
If a manager is going all the way to help you leave the company, I mean, what does that say to the rest of the team? It's like, wow, this guy is going all out to help me. And
100%.
that kind of just feeds into that team morale. It helps, the other employees to stay and not look away. And yeah, like you mentioned, that community aspect of it is huge. Go ahead.
It's just this open, honest dialogue, right? Let's just have a conversation. What are your goals? What are my goals? Right? My goals was to build work market. I am 100% convinced that me doing these types of things and having these conversations with the team members about what they wanted, their career developments, and me being so engaged in them helped me with my goal. And it helped them with their goal. And when goals are aligned, everybody, that is the win-win, right? And so just being clear about that stuff is so powerful. Walk into your next meeting and just be like, what do you want to make sure we accomplish here? And I will tell you, we had a bunch of meeting rules at Work Market. First one is you could not have a meeting over a half hour without my approval. Because
Really?
I do not believe that any meeting needs to be longer than a half hour. Quite frankly, I think most meetings can be about 15 minutes. 2, every meeting had to be very clear about what its goal was. What are we trying to accomplish? Why do I have 5 people in a room, Zoom or otherwise? What is the agenda? The path we are going to use to achieve those goals. It has to stop 5 minutes before, and you need to make sure that all goals have been achieved and what the next steps are have to be outlined. Nobody can bring any other device into that meeting unless there's a customer issue, unless there's a personal issue or whatever, obviously. And anybody is empowered to get up and leave the meeting if they are not contributing to the agenda or the goal. It has nothing to do with them, or end the meeting. Be like, no, this is not a good use of people's time. Why are we here?
End the meeting.
Yeah. Like if they are identifying that there is no goal,
Wow.
then wait, why are we all in this room together? What are we trying to accomplish? And if no one can articulate it, the meeting is over. And so when I started doing this, I would walk around a conference room. I'd just walk into conference rooms to be like, what's the goal of this meeting? And if somebody couldn't answer me real quick, I'd be like, all right, everyone get out. This meeting's over. I don't care. It's over. Get out.
Wow.
Like nobody knows why they're here. And we would use analytics. I had one of the developers build a script because we use Google for everything. So on the Google calendars, and they could show me who was scheduling the most meetings with the most humans in them. And so I'd sit down and be like, you last week had 300 people hour of meetings. Was this necessary? What did you accomplish? And so we really hammered that down. Anyway, the point being is that you need to be very clear about what the goal is and what the agenda, the path you're going to use to get to that goal.
That's amazing. And man, Jeff, I think the people who are listening are looking at the dream job being right beside you and working for you. Power to just end meetings.
I tell you, man, the next company, this could be a 15-minute meeting rule. No meeting longer than 15 minutes without my approval.
Man, that is incredible. And just cognizant on time, Jeff, I want to kind of talk about your book because that's something that you're working on right now. You're trying to sell it and I want to help you out, promote it a little bit.
But I appreciate it.
Absolutely. But before that, I kind of want to take you back and let's look for those who are watching on YouTube. We have it on there with a beautiful key that says RIP, which I thought was very, very well put.
Thank you.
And that's kind of alluding to what the future of work is going to look like, which we'll talk about right after this question. And that question, Jeff, is I want you to go all the way back to childhood, reflecting on where you are now. What would you what would you say? Like, what were you thinking at the time? Is this surprising? Is this where you always thought you'd be? Big question.
It is a very, very big question. Well, I really wanted to be a police officer, and I got to do that. I wanted to be rich. I don't think I understood what that really meant. I just knew that we weren't.
Right.
We were upper middle class. I mean, like I was unbelievably fortunate where I got to grow up. And by any standards, the definition of rich, I guess I've achieved that. I would say in every way except for my personal life.
Personal life.
Like I very much enjoy my life as it is. But I really thought that I'd have a lot of kids and be married. And I have done neither. I have no regrets on that thing. But my personal life is in no way, shape, or form what I thought.
Wow. I mean, you hit most of them out of the bucket. So congrats to you.
Thank you.
You got everything on me. I got 0 out of all the 4 I thought I was going to do. Perfect. So with that said, sir, let's go on to your book. And before everyone starts freaking out that the end of jobs are coming and everyone's going to be jobless. What do you mean by this, Jeff?
So the title was designed to be evocative of the end of the job as we know it. And that job is the 9-to-5, one office, one manager job. That job had been dying in the pandemic, which obviously none of us foresaw, has massively sped up the death of that job. And we're moving to what we'll call the fluid, team-based, work from anywhere, always-on job. And so that transition has been happening for 30 years, and we probably gained 10 years of time over just 2020. But what it does not mean, to your point, is that the robots and AI are going to take all of our jobs. There is nothing that we can look at from a data standpoint, from a trend standpoint, that points to that. And what I'll say is this. The point of the book was to set up this framework of looking at the history of work, looking at the history of specific job functions, looking at the history of automation, looking at the data in the world of work, the data trends, what's persisted over different technological changes, and looking at how companies actually engage workers and deploy capital. And if we look through those three lenses, we have a much higher probability of making accurate predictions about the future of work. One of the predictions we can look at is to think about this fourth industrial revolution, the robots and AI, and how it compares to the first three industrial revolutions we went through. And because look, the robots and AI are not the first series of job-killing technologies to come on into the world of work over the last 200 years. So how have companies responded? What has been the pace of change? What is the pace of job disruption? What happens to those jobs? What happens to those workers? What do we do as a society from a social safety net standpoint, a regulatory standpoint? And where does this balance of power between workers and companies play out when you have this huge disruption that massively tilts the balance to companies? Companies always have the power in that relationship, by the way, but it tilts it even further to companies. And then how do we get back into some sort of balance? Because the huge tip never lasts. So when we look at that, we see that 10 to 15% of jobs over the next 20 years are going to go. They're going to be displaced by automation. Automation in the form of robots, automation in the form of machines, automation in the form of AI and other enterprise software. And we see that 10 to 15% of jobs will be created. We will see new jobs in some of the areas supporting the automation technologies, which always happens, in ancillary fields, in fields that require more human contact and customer interaction, and then in industries and functions we never even thought of.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that history would teach us, that the data trends and patterns would teach us. So certainly not the end of jobs, meaning we will have a decreased number of jobs because of the fourth industrial revolution.
Right on, right on. And I had two questions from that front. With the companies and the executives gaining more power through this next revolution, just based on the way that it's going, what can, I guess, society do to keep up with this? Since, you know, the companies have the majority of the capital, they are able to lobby and, you know, get their way, quote unquote, a little bit easier than the average worker.
So what we see historically, and I have no reason to think that this time it will be different, often quoted as the 5 most dangerous words in business. This time it is different, because it's almost never different, is the regulatory environment, the social safety net, and unions. Those are traditionally the counterbalancing forces that end up augmenting the workers' power in the relationship. You will certainly see with this administration a move forward of the regulatory state. In the previous administration, we saw a rollback. I don't think that that is something that would have persisted regardless. And here you will see a move forward of the regulatory state. You will see changes to the social safety net. There's certainly a lot of talk about some of the stimulus payments, some of the child care payments becoming permanent. There's more and more talk about a universal basic income. I'm not here to debate or discuss the benefits of those things. I'm just saying that historically that is in line with what we see, an increase in the welfare state, potentially permanent, sometimes not. And then importantly is the union movement. Now, look, unions in the United States are at a historic low as their percentage of the labor force over the last 100+ years. But what I love to point to here is the fight for 15. The fight for 15 started by the SEIU, the Service of Employees International Union in Seattle, but it morphed into a grassroots activist, non-union led campaign across the United States where workers in common cause united, not because they were all in the same industry, not because they all work for the same company and they were protesting some sort of power imbalance there. They were protesting and arguing against the power imbalance systemically in the labor force, that $7.25 an hour, the federal minimum wage, is unlivable. And through their actions, by putting things on the ballot, by supporting politicians, by augmenting the conversation, we now have a tremendous number of states that are on a path to a $15 minimum wage. None is there yet, but there are paths, states and cities, municipalities, counties that are able to regulate their own minimum wage. And we have an administration that is trying like heck to get a federal minimum wage passed. That is a sea change as to where we were 3 years ago. No, this is something that without the changes that are being wrought in the labor market, and this was nothing to do with COVID, this was all pre-COVID.
Right.
These changes wouldn't have happened. And they happen because these are the trends and the currents of history, that when one group gains too much power, the other group will fight back. And we have this beautiful system of the ballot box that allows them to fight back. Because when we look historically, these are times of revolution. Luckily, we have these safety valve elections, and we have the ability to change the people that represent us and the policies that they put in place. And so I think you can anticipate seeing more of that in the coming years.
Right on. Seems like it's going to be a lot of interesting news coming to America and hopefully up north in Canada as well.
Indeed.
I had one question just following up on that 2-question dynamic that I didn't mention, but I'm currently interested in pursuing medicine. And I'm wondering, with your expertise in this field, how do you see AI in the future of technology kind of playing into that field? I'm not sure if you have that niche covered.
So the short answer is it is not one that I've studied in depth, and it's a very, very important point, because in order to understand this stuff, you really need to study it in depth. You need to look industry by industry, job function by job function. A lot of people like to paint broad brushes, like, oh, AI is coming, oh, doctors, all that stuff's going to be done by robots and overseas, and by AI, looking at, the classic example of the radiologists. Because somebody in India can look at a radiology, it can look at an image. So the AI can look at an image. No, it hasn't happened. Everyone thought it was going to happen 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Oh, all the X-rays are going to be looked at by people overseas. Didn't happen for a host of reasons. But when I think about the medical field, the healthcare field, it is certainly one from a data standpoint that the Bureau of Labor Statistics, anybody else that is predicting job growth, predicts tremendous job growth in the field because of the human interaction points that are so incredibly, incredibly important and non-replicatable. And when I think about the higher end parts of that field, whether it's surgeries or being a doctor, the idea that you're going to be displaced by a robot, to me, is kind of laughable. What we have to do when we look at a job function is we have to think about and study the component tasks of that function. And if 50% or more of the component tasks of that job are repetitive, high-volume tasks, the same thing over and over again, that job tends to have some sort of automation brought to it, and some job losses. Obviously, when there's 100% of the component tasks in a job, you see almost 100% of job losses, except in the context of customer service, and we can talk about that later if you want. But the idea that a doctor has many, if any, tasks that are repetitive, high-volume tasks, I'm sure there are some. So I shouldn't have said if any, but very, very few of the tasks of a medical professional are repetitive, high-volume tasks, because you're always interacting with a person. So this, to me, is an example of there will be some tasks that are taken over by an AI system, diagnostics and things like that, allowing for more of the human interaction and understanding that patient's particular circumstance.
Very great answer. I love that. And I think the automatic blood pressure monitor is kind of an example of that, because you could do that yourself, but now there's a machine takes care of all that, and you can talk to them while they're doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I had a question a little bit more general than that niche that kind of helped me in my future career decisions. But let's say we have a grade 12 student, just graduated high school during COVID, and they want to go into a field and a job that they can make a decent amount of money and they can be employed for a longer term. What advice would you have for them?
So I would say to go hard. To either go hard tech or hard human. Hard tech, the STEM jobs, I mean, look, there is still a tremendous supply and demand imbalance in that field, and the unemployment rate for developers has got to be close to zero.
Wow.
Like, it is just, there is no forecast that shows any slowing down of the need for people with hard technical skills. The flip side is the hard human skills, and those are the skills of empathy and creativity and design and human interaction and customer service and sales. There is no near-term or medium-term prospect of a robot or AI being able to take over that function. In the long term, everything's off the table, but the idea that any of the advanced AI companies or robotics companies are doing anything that is commercializable in this space in 20 years' time is, to me, laughable. And so that is another area, the hard human jobs, that you see, again, the World Economic Forum, the Bureau of Labor Statistics just predict growth in those job sectors.
Huge. And I kind of just wanted to switch gears a little bit. And I'm not sure if you've seen those MIT robots that they have. Yeah? Okay, you have.
I have.
So back in like 2012, these robots were doing just super simple functions like walking to a set point. I saw one recently where these people are doing like ballerina choreographies and all of this. I'm just wondering, like, what should we be expecting of the future technology in this field? Are we going to get like a Terminator situation where they actually have the capability of overtaking the world? And I'm kind of just using that as a joke, but
this Skynet scenario.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I've got a whole chapter in the book, the Skynet scenario, subchapter. So here's what I'll say. And if your listeners haven't seen it, you should go to YouTube and just, put in robotics. Boston Dynamics, I think, has got some great videos, or Boston Robotics, where they're jumping from thing to thing and doing backflips and running upstairs. Those robots are like $20 million each. And so while robots are getting smarter, are getting more dexterous, and are getting cheaper, those are three things that are definitively happening, because the robots today, that $20 million robot was $1 billion, years ago, whatever it is. So they are getting smarter, they're getting more dexterous, and they are certainly getting cheaper. While all that is happening, it's important to remember that they remain incredibly dumb, incredibly clumsy, and incredibly expensive. Like, there is no sea change coming in the next 5 to 10 years where there's going to be a robot in everybody's home. Like, full stop, not happening. I will be the house on this. Anybody wants to place a bet? The most popular usage right now for advanced robotics is vacuum cleaners. The Roomba vacuum cleaner is by far the biggest use of advanced robotics on the planet today. That's the commercialization aspect we have right now, is a vacuum cleaner. And we are decades away from a commercialized robot walking around from either a Terminator standpoint or an iRobot standpoint. Decades.
Wow. Okay. Whew.
Yeah.
We don't need Schwarzenegger for a while then.
I'm not sure he could do much right now, but yeah.
That's true. We'll see. Maybe he'll invent some sort of AI. I mean, the guy's done movies. He's been in government. The guy's done a lot.
He's an amazing, amazing human.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, Jeff, we've talked on so many facets of life, and I know you have a bunch of things going on. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to give some shout outs, and then after we'll go on to our one message and we'll thank you and we'll go on to our closing segment. So please, any shout outs you have, Jeff? Anywhere that people can find you, find your book?
Sure. Well, I will tell you, I wish I could say that it is available anywhere fine books are sold, but we're still not in that point in our opening up yet from the pandemic. And so there is this online retailer, Amazon, that, as I mentioned in the beginning, we were lucky enough to hit #1 in all of Amazon's HR categories, so that was super cool. And so the last shout out I'd give on the book is just thanks to the contributors of the book. There's a chapter I have in here that 20 of the leading thinkers in the world of work, the men and women that are shaping the future of work, wrote for me their 4 or 5 pages on what they think the world of work looks like in 2040. It's one thing for me to take this framework of history and data and how companies actually engage workers and deploy capital and make my predictions. It's another to ask the men and women that are shaping the world of work what they think. And so I am super, super grateful to them for being a part of this journey with me.
Awesome. And what would be your one message to our audience? This can be from something we talked about in this conversation. It can be something completely tangential that you're maybe thinking about right now. However you're feeling, intentionally broad.
I will stay with the book and say that the main thing I hope people take away is to be wary of simple conclusions. People like to draw the conclusion, oh, this tech exists, therefore that job's going to go. And history and data and how companies actually engage workers would tell us no, that it very rarely, if ever, happens. What you need to do is be thoughtful, look at evidence, and study industry by industry, job function by job function. And so this whole idea of be wary of simple conclusions is one that I hoped to address with the book, but I would say certainly applies to a lot of other areas in life.
Beautiful. I love that. And with that, Jeff, thank you so much for coming on to our show. We gained a lot of value from your personal life story, the lessons you took from being, dropped down a little bit, only to climb up way higher, and your book and how it's going to impact our world, because it's coming. And I just wanted to thank you again. I learned a lot personally and looking forward to share this with our audience. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey everyone, Param back after another amazing episode with another amazing guest. We hope we added value into your life so you could take the tips from this episode and fuel your process forward. If you enjoyed our episode today and think other friends or family members may also appreciate the lessons that our podcast brings, be sure to share us with them. Subscribe and rate our show so we know how we did. And always remember, trust the process.